Neil's work on the Oxford Circus Junction in London. That's a project that my colleagues at Atkins were also involved in, and it's a project that features extensively in Atkins marketing collateral, not just because it's in a very iconic part of London, but because it was a project that was so successful in readdressing the balance of the needs of pedestrians and vehicular traffic, and a project that so successfully improved the pedestrian conditions at that location. I'm going to ask our three speakers to join me again at the front here, and as they make their way up, I want to provide some extra wider context to the conference today and also this particular session on pedestrian safety. It's no coincidence that this week is the UN Global Safety Week. It's a week that has been preceded by the publication by World Health Organization and partners of a good practice guide to pedestrian safety, a road safety manual for decision makers and practitioners, and this draws on the work that they did for the Global Status Report on Road Safety for 2013 and follows in the footsteps of the OECD report, Pedestrian Safety, Urban Space and Health, that was produced towards the end of last year. So there's enormous amount of documentation available now that tells the story of pedestrian safety at the moment and offers some guidance as to how we can improve issues going forward. And these issues are underlined by a number of facts. The staggering statistic that over 270,000 pedestrians died on the world's roads last year. And this accounts for nearly 1/4 of all road deaths. But this proportion actually varies by region. In Southeast Asia, the proportion is just over 10%, whereas in some countries such as Korea, Japan, and some African countries, that proportion is close to 40%. And of course, there's the very true fact that pedestrian deaths are sudden, they are violent, they are unexpected, and of course they bring significant emotional consequences as a result. The risk factors are numerous. We've heard from Julian on vehicle speed, driver behaviour, of course, and behaviour that's exacerbated by drinking and, in more recent times, mobile phone use, human error, road infrastructure design, inadequate enforcement, and visibility are also risk factors for consideration. But the best practice is not advising us to stop walking to eliminate these risks. What it's saying is that we should be putting better measures in place to protect pedestrians, and this will actually bring multiple benefits. Not just safety benefits, but health benefits, as we've already heard, environmental benefits, because more people are walking and not using motorised transport, and finally, of course, community benefits, because pedestrians tend to congregate together in a way that motorists cannot. The Safe Walking Framework within the World Health Organization best practice seeks to enforce new and existing laws. Infrastructure design that seeks to segregate, but not only segregate, also to lower speed and improve visibility. We are seeking more pedestrian zones within city centres, vehicle designs that actually reduce the impact on a pedestrian at impact, and enhanced trauma care systems. So what about Hong Kong? Well, we've seen from Julian these two graphs already, and they show an encouraging trend of reduced accidents and numbers killed. And as I was listening to the presentations just now, it struck me that there was a common thread running through each of the themes. It struck me that Julian's safer streets with lower speeds and calm traffic were the same streets that Dr. Ning would have reduced air pollution, and of course the very same streets that Neil would see improved pedestrian movement and safety. And as I wandered around Tsim Sha Tsui yesterday, close to my workplace, I noted that Tsim Sha Tsui has an interesting mixture of a lot of the elements that we've already seen this morning. On the left-hand side there we see the full segregation that is the pedestrian subway network, a rather drab and dreary pedestrian subway network. Next to that we see Hai Phong Road with its lovely trees. Hai Phong Road is a road that's responded very well to traffic calming over the years and more space given over to pedestrian movement. And on the far right is the full pedestrianisation that is Centenary Square over in East Tsim Sha Tsui. Finally, the bottom left is probably one of my favourite examples of poor pedestrian planning in Tsim Sha Tsui. For those who are not familiar with this particular location, this is Kowloon Park Drive. So strong is the pedestrian desire line at this location to cross at grade that despite the very best efforts of Highways Department to put 3 lines of barriers in the way, that there is still the additional need to put up all sorts of signs warning pedestrians not to cross and directing them down to the alternative subway crossing. Now, I don't know, I must admit, what the traffic implications would be of putting an at-grade crossing at this location. But judging by the amount of infrastructure required to affect pedestrian safety here, it would seem that there is a better solution. Okay, enough talking from me. I'm going to ask you now to pose some questions to our panellists. So anybody who wants to have a question and direct it to any of our panellists, please let me know. Oren.
Thank you. Very interesting set of presentations. I just have a couple of quick questions on traffic signals, which are directed to the person who gave us a very interesting presentation on that, which is Neil. 2 questions. One, as an engineer, as a traffic engineer, I'm very curious to know your view on what to me seems like huge inefficiency in or kind of moments of imbalance between the saturation on the road and saturation on the sidewalk. My own personal solution to that is jaywalking. And I'm wondering if, and I think, yes, thank you, I think I am helping the public, even though everybody looks at me as a criminal, but I do think it's, if everybody jaywalked, it might restore some balance. But I'm really interested to know what the engineering view is on jaywalking. That's question number 1. Question number 2, anecdotal observation in Hong Kong and some degree elsewhere tells me that the bigger the plots, the wider the roads. I mean the plots, I mean the parcels being developed or surrounded by roads, you know, as opposed to, let's say, a close, a tighter grid, the longer the light cycles, the signal cycles. Is that because our engineers are lazy in new areas where you have, you know, wider roads and so on, or is that something that's kind of part of the laws of physics of traffic signals?
Can you hear that? Thank you. But what has come to the fore in most recent years is actually psychology, and that's understanding the behavior of people as they use the roads, both drivers and pedestrians. And of course, that differs around the world. So, for instance, in Berlin, you'll see people waiting at a traffic light for 60 seconds for the green man to come up. There isn't a vehicle within 300 meters. In London, you won't see that because people jaywalk. In Hong Kong, there's a mixture of behaviors. Undersaturated traffic signals for traffic will naturally mean that pedestrians will wait. What am I waiting for? And they won't want to cross. Ideally, the signal settings should change about 6 or 7 times a day to accommodate that, so that you shouldn't have to wait too long. But I think there are only so many engineers available in Hong Kong to do that. So I actually think in Hong Kong it's a function of political will to get something done better and resources, and also training of engineers, training of good engineers. Training of engineers doesn't mean that they stick their, with the greatest respect to traffic modelers, that they stick their head in a computer screen, that they get out on the street and understand how people move around the city. and particularly how they behave. The traffic engineer's eye is his or her best tool. And if they get out and about, then they will understand that sort of situation and be able to do something about it if they're given the power to intervene. Which was? Yeah, well, that's again a function of mathematics. The bigger the highway, the more traffic it can accommodate, and therefore the longer the cycle times are likely to be because they need to get more traffic through at the same degree of saturation.
PolyU. We never design signal for pedestrian flow, as you know. We design signal for vehicular flow. Only when the pedestrian is really massive flow, then we have a total pedestrian facing, which means that in Central, many signals would give total green for all directions. Now that is you have to justify with the pedestrian flow. So you're talking about the length of the cycle. Unfortunately, again, we look at vehicular flow. And most of the time, when there's a peak for the vehicular flow, and also it would be peak for the pedestrian flow. And that is especially in the morning peak and afternoon peak. In lunchtime, yes, we change the setting, as you said, every day at least with 6 to 8 settings, and sometimes it is traffic flow responsive setting as SCOOT and also SCAD that we're using. So unless the transport department change the design manual, I think that would, because we train engineers to work according to the manual. We have the transport planning design manual. I think it is probably copied from the UK as well.
20 years ago.
20 years ago. Unless the transport department is willing to change that to design for pedestrian flow at the junction as well. Now at the moment we just justify the width, as you point out there, we justify the width of the crossing. So the only thing that we would do is the width of the crossing. It would change, but then most traffic signal, we just compress the pedestrian to move without obstruction to the traffic. So if the road is very wide, usually there would be a central reserve, then you would need to wait in the middle in line with the traffic flow. It means that when the traffic not flow, then you cross a little bit. When the traffic flow, then you have to stop. And that is the sort of setting at the moment. As you point out, unless the design change and then the engineers, we train them, but we are bound because we can't train them to do something outside this scope. Although we do mention at that particular spot when we ask student design signal, particularly I would ask them to pay very good attention, very strong attention to the pedestrian crossing. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Julian or for Dr. Ning? Yes, over here, please.
I don't think I specifically have them for Julian or Dr. Ning, but I'll try and introduce all of you. I think what we're hearing again and again is I can't do anything unless government has a vision or takes control. And as a consultant in this town, and I've been trying to adopt a lot of these ideas from London for a number of years. I'm aware of the health aspects, and I think we all are. We can't, at the grassroots and consultant level, get things changed in Hong Kong. We've got to have government take this on. We've got to have Transport Department and Highways take it on. And I think the thing about London was you had Boris Johnson with a vision. So I suppose my question is, can we do it without somebody at the top with a vision? Do you think it's possible? So there's the answer. But could the health and safety of our citizens, which is a very, very motivating factor, give somebody senior in our government the endorsement to make this a number one public issue? Otherwise, we're going to go round and round saying the same things. We've been doing it for 10 years here. Paul's been doing it forever. So sorry, that's not a question, that's a statement, but thank you for those.
Can you hear that? Anyway, just briefly on the same lines really, but Julian, you took the approach of defining the realignment of the streets by speed limits. I'm not quite sure whether that was just a cipher for a changed nature of the streets, i.e. removal of the priority that Wing Tat and others are talking about of vehicles over, motor vehicles over pedestrians. But do you feel that by taking that, did you take that approach based on speed because you thought that was the driver of change, or would we be better looking at the prioritization and the psychology of motor vehicles come first as the driver?
Well, the whole concept of lower speed limit for urban streets, not for highways, I'm not talking about highways, is that we want to shift the balance between pedestrian and motorists. But certainly we also need to create the right street environment. We want to adopt specific street character, say for 40 kilometers per hour street, and also specific streetscapes for 30 kilometers per hour zones. But that would take a lot of time. We cannot wait until we install all these changes. And also traffic calming measures like speed tables, and we have gateways. We have many of these, but we cannot make them within, say, 20 or 30 years. But we can't wait. So I think as a first step, we just build up the system and then educate the road users, and then to have the zoning signs set up, but together with the removal of some other user signs. So we don't want to have the whole street filled up with signs. We have zoning signs only at the beginning. And but that would be a long-term vision. But we need to, I think, make a start, not only to traffic calm a few streets in the main center, but we want to do it on an area-wide basis.
We have time before lunch for one more question, preferably for Dr. Ning.
Yes, I would like to ask a question for Dr. Ling. I'm very concerned on the environmental impacts arising from the traffic flows you have talked to us. I would like to know, because we have Hong Kong Planning Standard and Guideline, which provide protection to pedestrians and neighborhood, particularly on traffic pollution. But the government do not really follow on the guideline. What do you think, particularly in the Kowloon West, like Yau Ma Tei, we are living in Prosperous Garden. We have over 10 highway and 5 over an interchange before our house. This is very poisonous, and the noise had exceeded 7 dBA, very high, the noise level, around 80 dBA, very high. And then we have smell, those emissions from the car. Government do not do anything, and they still input and they still install another large traffic emission, that is the Central Kowloon Wood tunnel portal without any protection. So what do you think, what can be helpful for us to ask the government to protect our life under such situation? The problem, you have said that government would introduce new initiatives such as the low emission zone. The problem is that they put all the vehicle, they put all those vehicles into our western highways, and then which our place become over-concentrated and oversaturated. And what can be done in this situation? How to enforce the standard? Yes, thank you.
This is a very, very general question I oftentimes face when I talk to different people. That there's a very sensitive relationship here between the government and the general public. And I think there is a very interesting interaction here that between, as a general public, as you mentioned, there is a certain concern for the environmental safety, for even people living next to the different, even like in your case, different highways, the overhead highways. And oftentimes in other cases, the roadside, the streets, there are streets, and for the vendors, and for many buildings, the people live next to the streets and very high level. So your question will be, what government can do? I think that my additional question, adding to this comment, will be, what other people can do in this interaction between the general public and the government? Now, the one thing I want to mention here, for the research, what research can do, and as a scientist, as an engineer, we can do, is to provide scientific evidence to emphasize the importance of the protection. Now, very interesting example I can give you about, in 2006, there's some studies back in Los Angeles. This study, the air pollution, they can diminish or they disperse within 150 meters away from the freeway. Because this is a research finding, the government, the California government, even regulate all of the schools, the new schools, that cannot be built within the 150 meters away from the freeway. So that's how the science can help the government to guide the future policy making for the government. I think there is an interesting interaction between the public and the government. And in between, we hope the research can do, and also like the civic exchange as a non-profit organizations, we can do to help inform the government the importance of the work, and also to assure the public can be protected by the new policy making.
Okay, I think it's lunchtime. Please join me in thanking our three speakers and